So yeah, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Impact in Nailing the UX Job Interview featuring Zoë Glas. This event is brought to you by SDXD, San Diego Experience Design Professional Network. I'm Antonio, the president, and we're a community of over 5,000 members worldwide, and we meet monthly to share ideas and just make connections. So thanks for joining us. This event wouldn't be possible without our amazing board members, so thank you guys for everything. And this event is also sponsored by ServiceNow. James, would you like to talk about ServiceNow for us?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Antonio, SDXD, and of course, our featured speaker, Zoë Glas. I'm a program manager here in ServiceNow's Experience Org, and we're a team of over 650 designers, researchers, technical writers, and program managers who work on making the world of enterprise software flow. With over 80% of the Fortune 500 and 70 million users on our platform, our work makes the world work. So if you're interested in learning more about the company and the team, I am pasting a link to our UX careers page in the chat. Thanks again, and back to Antonio.
Thanks, James. And thanks to ServiceNow. All right. So now we have just a couple of announcements, or one announcement. Look out for the holiday party if you're a local to San Diego. It's hosted by UX Speakeasy, and it will be on December 7th at 6 p.m. We'll post a link to the meetup in the chat. So it's always a good time to meet everybody in San Diego, and yeah, hope to see you there. And as well, you can join our Slack. We have a Slack channel for our community where we post our events, job postings. We also have discussions about the events. So please welcome, please feel free to join us. And now onto our event. So after this, we're going to have Zoe's amazing presentation. It's going to have a couple of interactive bits, which I'm sure she'll talk about in a second. Followed at the end, if we have time, we can do any additional questions. And if you want to stay past that, we have a post-event networking session. No pressure, but it's always nice to talk and meet everyone after the event. So we'll let everybody unmute themselves, and depending on how many people, we sometimes do rooms in Zoom. All right.
Awesome. I think that's my cue. I'm going to steal your screen.
Okay. Thanks, Zoe.
Hope everyone's doing well. Anyway, hi, I'm Zoe. A lot of you know me, which is weird at this point, but really exciting as well. I'm a senior UXR at Google, and I work on privacy-related work, internal tooling. This is the fun thing we have to say when we work at Google. I do not speak for the brand or the company, which is also to say I've worked a bunch of places. So this advice that we're going to talk through today broadly applies. It is definitely not a Google-specific thing. I'm a career switcher. A lot of you know that about me. I actually used to be a wildlife biologist. I did things like training skunks to run on treadmills and taking teeth out of bears. So very different than what I'm doing now, but always pretty exciting. I've been a hiring manager. I am not right now, unfortunately, especially with all the layoffs. I wish I was, but I am on hiring committees, and I have shaped the hiring requirements at various companies. So I've definitely been involved in this. And I've helped over 70 folks at this point land their first or second UX job, or at least these are the folks that email me afterwards and say, hey, that advice you gave me totally worked. I love these emails. So by the way, if I ever work with you in one-on-one and it works, let me know. It's always a joy to receive them. A couple of rules for engagement today. We have a Slido that's going to get dropped into the chat. Ask questions in there, and you can also upvote people's questions. So if there's somebody else asks a question you really like, please like it. It'll get to the top of the list. We'll have various question breaks throughout this, and I will answer kind of the top ones at those points. There will also be various points where you will have a little bit of heads down time to practice some of the things we are talking about. And at that point, I will go into Slido and answer some of those questions that we miss in the other points. If you do need more info after this, There are other resources that we're going to provide today. You can also connect on ADP list. I am taking a break until January, but at that point, I would absolutely love to talk to you. And there are interactive components. Please interact. It makes it fun. It makes it, I promise you will learn a little bit more. If you're the kind of person who doesn't like to share, that is okay. But I really strongly encourage you to try the exercises, do as much as you can, do whatever you're comfortable with. It will help with some of these concepts. Awesome. And then you might see throughout the deck a little artist palette or a little beaker. That means it is something that is specific to design or research. There are not a ton of these, but keep an eye out. There are times that that will come into play. And then keep in mind, it's always good to know people's biases. I'm a researcher. I'm not a designer, so I definitely outreached a bunch of designers in this. But if you're sitting here as a designer and like, oh God, I think something else might be at play, or I want to know something more specific, trust that little instinct in your head and ask a designer, which we have a couple here today to help out. Cool. What to expect? If anybody's been to my talks before, you know my favorite topic is impact. So of course, we're going to start there. Impact is the heart, the center, the driver of absolutely everything we do as UXers. There is never going to be a point in your career where UX does not matter. This is getting a job. This is once you're in a job. This is figuring out the best way to do your job. So we're going to go over that. It will not be as in depth as it was last year when we were talking about resumes. If you do want a little bit more information, please go check out the YouTube. It's linked, but it's also on the channel. Zoë Glas plus resume pulls it right up. We're going to talk about some of the terms and roles. There is so much jargon in UX, and I know that is so overwhelming. This is one of the most common questions I get is like, how do I make my resume sound more UXy, or how do I make sense of this world? Pro tip, you never will, and that is okay. I am constantly learning new jargon, but we're going to talk about the most common stuff that you're going to engage with when you are going through the hiring process. One thing about jargon, everyone knows it's dumb, by the way. So if you are in an interview process and you hear it, ask. I promise you, whoever is using that jargon will just apologize and explain it. You do not need to be ashamed. You do not need to be embarrassed. We as UXers need to do a better job of this. But until then, that's where we are. We'll talk about the interview format, what you're going to expect throughout this process, and some tips for each phase. And finally, nailing those impact and interview questions and the research or design presentation that you're going to do on site. Again, we'll have question breaks throughout. So keep those in mind, drop them in Slido, and we will engage as much as possible. Now, I've talked about this a lot. Impact is so key, and so is storytelling. And I think we talk about this a lot where we're like, oh, storytelling, and you think in your mind, oh, I really want to tell, you know, the PR version of my work that like highlights every little bit. That's not true. We want to tell engaging stories. We want to be able to look at each other and go, oh, that makes so much sense. That's so cool. I want to hear about that. Storytelling is really important. I will say I've been working on a portfolio with a woman in this room, and she just said, hey, I'm getting it now, which is so exciting for me to hear. But seriously, a non-UXer should find your work interesting. We'll talk about that a lot today, but lean into that storytelling, lean into that summer camp kid making up a ghost story. That will make you an amazing UXer. And that video is linked. If you haven't watched it, it's about 2 hours long. The deck is also available if you are more of a non-audio learner. Cool. Impact. Everybody's favorite word. So impact is the result of your work and why it mattered. I really want to emphasize it's the result. One of the biggest mistakes I see, and I see this all the time, is we say the impact of my work was the amount of it I did. I did 500 surveys. I did 1.5 million interviews. I did whatever. And we're like, it's so impactful, I did it. And that paradigm is on the basis of how we were taught to do resumes, how we were taught to do job applications back in high school, where we say, if you've done it 1 million times, you will be good at it. And there are certainly some things in life where that is true. If you swing a hammer at a wall 1 million times, eventually you're going to figure out how to get the nail in most efficiently. Unfortunately, UX isn't really like that. You will work with UXers in your career who are just starting out and are some of the most brilliant researchers you've ever known. I spoke with someone earlier today. They've been working as a contractor at Google for only 6 months, and they're already having these brilliant strategic discussions of how these things go. I have also worked with people that have been in the field for 10 years, and I'm like, oh God, this didn't get anywhere. So don't tell me numbers, tell me the output. Who listened? What changed? What was more interesting? What helped people make decisions, and what was the result of that decision? That's what impact is. I did something, something else came out of it. I watered a plant, a flower grew. Tell me about that flower. It's always about the why. Why did it matter? Why was it important that that flower was there? A flower can be great. A flower can be a weed. How do you tell me it's the rose that reminded your neighbor of their lovely wife who passed away the year before and it brought them so much joy? That's the story I want. That's the impact I want. Just the work version. Fun fact though, that's going to be anything in your career. If you used to work at Sephora, there is impact. If you used to work at Baskin Robbins, there is impact. If you used to work at Google, there is impact. Academia, impact. So whatever you came from, I promise we can tell an impactful story. Now, to be more to the point within the working world, it's the connection between your work and the business outcome. Now, don't get too stuck on this. The business outcome is the easiest one to talk about in terms of metrics, but there are so many reasons we do things for a business reason that won't necessarily have metrics or output. I know that can feel overwhelming, but increasing accessibility, getting more people to come to the table, making more people feel more welcome at the table. These are all great bits of impact that don't necessarily have like an Elon Musk approved numerical number to it. But he's a great example. Lots of things that he should have been focusing on business-wise have not been going well for him. So think about it as a holistic thing, but tell me about what came of it. And to make this a little bit more to home, it's that bridge, it's that connection. Tell me how you got from what you did to why it matters. Do not just tell me what you did. No matter how brilliant of a researcher you are, if you are a Nobel Prize winning researcher, telling me about the experiment is not interesting. It's what came of it. And this is a circular process. You're going to go through it over and over again. And that's great. One of the big things about storytelling is connecting them one to the other. How do we move through? Now, one of the things we get stuck on all the time, and I hear this especially from people earlier in their career or coming from academia, is, well, what is impact? I haven't had a product ship. I've done these mock things. I haven't seen anything out in the world. I don't have these like really quite sexy numbers. Increase this by 10%, decrease that by 5%. But there's a lot of different ways to do impact. One of those is tough problems, just doing things that are hard and emphasizing that they were hard and that you figured it out anyway. These are things like strategy, figuring out the way a team should go or not go. One of the best bits of impact I see is when somebody said, yeah, we committed to this. It turns out it was a bad idea, and I convinced us not to do it. I saved us all this time and effort by not doing it. It can also be technical difficulty. I love this, especially with research. If you're working with really protected populations, those are really hard to recruit, really hard to work with, and really hard to get great research out of, especially if it's a new population to you. Talking about how you made sure that it was equitable and inclusive throughout that process, great way to show impact. So lots of different things that are just hard. Product impact is definitely the easiest to talk about. These are increase in adoption, increase in usability, of revenue, decrease in costs. As you get into your first job, these become much easier. You're going to talk to people like James. You're going to talk to your product people and say, hey, that experiment we ran, what was the outcome? And they're going to give you, hopefully, this really easy list that says, you told us to change A, we did, and we made more money. And they are so easy to write at that point. But wait until you're in the field. Don't worry about it in the meantime. All that matters is you're showing me the connection between what you did, why it mattered, what came of it. And finally, a big one is leadership. This can be things like management, managing people, managing money. If you are a lab manager, that's a great one. It can also say like you did something in a new way, drove people to consider something differently. Working through really difficult politics. Just researchers and designers, we are always going to deal with difficult politics of people that want to do things for reasons that we don't agree with, or that they won't tell us why they want to do something that we think is a bad idea. Your ability to navigate through that, such a huge plus. So really lean into those. As long as you can tell a clear story about it, it's a great thing to talk about. Don't get stuck on the product bit. So just to hammer this home even more, these can be things like collaboration, leading a working group, getting more people to the table, improving accessibility, making it easier for more people to use your product, hosting an offsite. This was huge in the pandemic, by the way. People that were making opportunities for people to connect in the world that, as it felt really fragmented. Great way to show impact. You made your team feel more cared for and loved. That can affect retention and job satisfaction. Great impact opportunity. Mentoring, always a good one. And design changes, these are probably the easiest. But I know there's a lot of you sitting there going, great, I'm not there yet. This also is in academia. These are like, how many people cited your paper? Was this a really good paper that everyone loved? Or like, did you publish it in the journal Southwest Naturalists, which is for wildlife people, one of the easier public papers to publish in, that's so niche. Could be grants received, increases in your scope, awards you received, clients you retained, products you sold, or even things like how many dogs did you pet because you changed the way that you engage with strangers. There are so many ways that you can talk about different impact. And why do we care about this? I think this is where it comes up over and over again as people say, hey, I did amazing research. I shouldn't have to tell you exactly what it did. But unfortunately, the difference between good impact or good UX and impactful UX is actually quite significant. If you are the most meticulous researcher or designer of all time, and it takes you 6 months to develop something, but what comes of it is perfect, the golden egg, the Nobel-worthy thing, but your team made that decision 3 months ago, it doesn't matter how good it is. It's not going to be integrated. In very few instances are you ever going to convince engineers to delete something they've already done and start fresh because research and design finally caught up. Good UX and impactful UX are not the same thing. We really want to know that you had an opportunity to make things better for your product, to make things better for your team, and to push that thing forward. Good UX often comes represented with things like, this is a method that I use, this is how many people I talked to or who was involved in a readout, how many different methods or different types of method I tried, number of people in a study or number of studies. The other bit of this is no matter what you tell me about a research project, I will never know if you used the right method. Chances are I'm going to guess that you used the wrong because I might not have enough information. But method choice, design choice is so subjective and relative to your team and your goal that you're never going to convince me in a resume. You're never going to convince me in a presentation. What you are going to convince me of is impactful UX. And these are things that come of it. Again, support of new users, reduction in toil, retention. And by the way, that toil might be internal users or external. Speed in getting something out the door, collaboration, all of these things that come because you put an input in. That's really what we want to hear about and what we're going to talk about a ton today. There's a couple different ways to find that impact. I have 2 methods that I love. The first is called the toddler method, or the why. This is when we keep asking ourselves over and over again, why did you do this? I think this is a particularly helpful one for academics who maybe were given a grant and walked away or dove in with set goals going in. Why did it happen? Why did this happen in the first place? And you can play this game with literally anything. My favorite to introduce it to people is, why did you eat dinner today? Well, I was hungry. Okay, well, what, why? Oh, I worked out. Okay, so I ate dinner because I worked out. Okay, well, what else? And you can get to a point where you say, oh, the point of eating dinner is to nourish my soul or to connect with my family or to create an opportunity to meet a new neighbor. And no longer is it just I made dinner, it's I made an opportunity to connect with a new neighbor. So always really pulling it apart until you get to that thing that is engaging and exciting. And you can definitely do this with your work. And you'll find there's some really cool reasons that you did things that maybe you haven't thought about for a while. But my other favorite one, it's called the grandma method or the so what, who cares method, which is how can you tell an engaging and interesting enough story that your grandmother, your grandfather, who does not know what you do, does not know anything about tech and really doesn't want to, this is the person that calls you every single time something goes wrong with their computer and you're expected to fix it. How do you tell a story that they understand, they think is interesting, and they understand what came of it so much that they could go to their bridge club and say, oh, little Susie, she's doing the coolest thing. Let me tell you about it. That's how simple it should be. It is not a jargonous thing. It is not a super techie thing. It is just good storytelling. And when you get to that point, I promise the jobs are going to come easier. The resume approvals are going to come easier. So we're going to take a moment to practice. There should be now a handbook that went in. with a link. Perfect, looks like Antonio just dropped it in. This is gonna be your first handbook method. This is a quick one. And we're gonna talk about impact. Focus on why, take the 4 whys method, dive really deep. I'm gonna give you 2 minutes to think about all of your whys for this prompt. And then we'll chat about it for 3 minutes. So the prompt is, what is the impact of walking a dog? If you are allergic to dogs or hate or scared of dogs or whatever else, refuse to believe that anyone actually hates dogs, replace it with cat. What is the point of walking a cat? What is the point of walking an animal? If your first name starts with A through L, what is the impact to the dog? If your first name starts with M through Z, what is the impact to the walker? So 2 minutes, jot down as many bits of impact as you can, and then we'll have people share a couple of their favorites. Yeah, go ahead and drop in the chat when you feel like you've got some good ones. Okay, this first one. Burning calories, health, great one. Quality time. So even taking that a next step further, how do you create that kind of bond? I improved my bond with my dog, my friendship. You can get kind of dramatic with these, by the way. The impact of improving that bond might be that your dog lives longer and brings you more joy. Really thinking about the ripple effect. You throw a stone into the water and it splashes out really, really far. What are all of those things that come into it? Okay, I'm really liking Laura's fresh air and pooping. But these are great ones, right? Like those are things you don't want in your house. You increase the cleanliness of your house through that. Exercise, I'm here for other dogs. Social bonding, I created opportunities for social bonding. That is amazing impact, right? You go through this exercise and you'll start to see all of this in different ways that impact can pop up. Darren says dog gets exercise, great one. Like they come of it, they calm down. What's the next step there? And I love the way you're moving through this, Darren, right? Getting exercise leads to physical health, amazing. That also gives you maybe this exposure to nature, which also affects that physical health and improves their emotional health, getting all the way to this better relationship. I improved my relationship with my pet by walking them every day. These are amazing bits of impact, and you can start to see where this would happen with your work. Sure, all you did was change a button, but that button made it so more people could find it, made it so more people were engaged with it. One of the big problems we see when we first start is most people that are really interested in research and design, really smart people that don't want to take credit for other people's work. You're not. If you enabled that work to happen, so you said the button should be green, and that was put into the app and came of it and went live, and maybe even somebody else's team also used the green button and increased revenue, that is still your impact. It does not just have to be the button. Follow it all the way out. Charlene's doing a great one here. Spend quality time, get exercise, all the way to cost savings and making friends, right? increase cost efficiency of pet ownership by walking my dog myself. These are great impacts. So play this game, continue to play this game with your work. If you don't remember why you did it and you're in academics, go back to the grant application. These tend to be the really big things on impact where we, I won't say overpromise, but we try to make it interesting to get the money. But really, what's the why? Why did I do this in the first place? I don't just walk my dog because walking is interesting, right? I mean, maybe it is, but even then it's mental stimulation. Awesome. Okay, I think people are really getting it. I love this. So we were supposed to have a question break there that I missed. So let's hop into the first question break. The first one we've got here, we'll get into two of these right now. A project that doesn't get past the discovery stage isn't a great case study example, but what's the best way to talk about projects that don't take flight? We'll talk about this a lot throughout today. There is always an impact of stuff that doesn't go anywhere, right? There is a reason we made the decision not to keep it there. There is a reason we didn't move forward with it. Think about what those reasons are or how you enabled another discussion to happen, right? Maybe you did all this research and figured out the pricing model was incorrect, but they kept the old one anyway. Well, why? What was their reason for it? And what other conversations did you enable? Other things that you can talk about are not about the outcome of that specific project. So for example, maybe you figured out a better way to work with your PM. Maybe you figured out a better way to engage with the CEO. Those are all amazing impact. And we'll take this last one for now. What is the expectation from hiring managers when your previous work is under NDA? Recommendations how to talk about the work without talking about the work. The one thing I would really encourage you to remember here is that every single person is playing this game. So if you say that is under NDA, people are going to believe you. It's going to be fine. You can abstract a lot without really getting into the details of it. You do want to avoid the extreme. I do remember like very vividly conducting 2 interviews and almost every other word was, I can't talk about that because it's under the NDA. And I had no idea what they actually did. But I can tell you a really engaging story of, gosh, yesterday I went to the park and it was so cool. It's been raining and it's really muddy. And I figured out a way to keep everybody clean. And what I did was I brought towels and these kind of wet wipes and had this system where everybody kind of had to play for 5 minutes and go through this system. You don't know if I'm talking about dogs or kids, right? It's still an engaging story. It doesn't necessarily matter the specific. Another great example of this is when you work with kids, you might not be able to talk about that. So you might instead say a protected population, enough to tell the story and you're good to go. A great thing to think about is a lot of times children's books, the characters don't actually have names. The story still makes sense. There is a lot that you can abstract. If at any point they say exactly what happened, you can definitely say, hey, that's under NDA and I'm not comfortable sharing. And I actually strongly encourage you to say that at least once in every interview session, because otherwise you don't know what's going on. We don't know if you can protect an NDA. So always be sure to protect it. Cool. Okay, hiring process. Talk about hiring terms. These are the people that you're going to talk with. There's going to be a lot of them. If you have not started a UX interview process, I'm sorry. It's awful. And I don't know why it's so long and it keeps getting longer, but that's where we are. So some terms we're going to talk about right away. The first being sourcer. There is a difference between a sourcer and a recruiter. The sourcer is the person that is often confused with a recruiter, but they do the initial thing. They are the first person to reach out to you. If somebody wrote you a note on LinkedIn that came out of nowhere, that almost guaranteed was a sourcer. They do very initial chats. They are trying to say, do you meet enough criteria in the bucket to put you in front of a recruiter? Sourcers often are not experts in your field. They might not even know very much about your field. They have a very specific list of requirements that they're going through to make sure that you have those. It's possible that you'll talk to this person. It's possible that you won't. So if you've ever been talking to someone online, like on LinkedIn, and that is, Josh B, and then your call is with Sarah M. I think James might be off mute. Somebody's off mute. That was your sourcer. It's not a bad thing. You did want to be passed on. The next person is the recruiter. This is the person that once you're deemed a candidate, you will be handled by this person generally for the rest of your interview process. I know this makes people nervous, by the way. Google very much always has a sourcer and a recruiter, and they say, hey, I got handed off to someone. Does that mean anything about me? No, that's just how the process works. They often are both very, very nice. There are smaller companies that won't have both, but larger companies often do. This person is not going to be an expert in your field in most cases, but they're going to have some good idea of what they're looking for. The more senior they are, the more expert they are. The people that tend to recruit for like director levels are very much experts in the field. So sourcer and recruiter. You also have your hiring manager. This is the person who's actually filling the role. In most cases, they are the person who would actually be your manager if you were brought on. They are kind of determining not only are you fit for the company, but are you fit for this specific team? Different companies do handle this differently. Google historically, you actually interviewed with people you would never work with. You were then approved to hire and then went through team match. We've changed that, but there are still companies that do it that way. So you might not interact with the hiring manager. Often you will. And finally, your interviewers. This is everyone else that you're going to talk to throughout the interview stage. They may or may not be team members. The recruiter will let you know if they are or not so that you can ask them better questions. Because if you're going to work with them, you do want to make sure you're interviewing them back. If you're not, you might want to save that time for questions about the company or other things more at large. How does this generally work for everybody? The first thing is going to be recruiter or sourcer screen. And you're just going to walk through it really quickly. It's a really fun, easy conversation. The next is almost some sort of skill interview. And finally, your hiring loop, which is 3 to 6 hours. It often has a presentation component and then a series of one-on-ones. Your recruiter will be on hand throughout that process to provide feedback and support. So lean into them. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Which is this: your recruiter is your friend. I swear to you, they can be the most powerful person in your interview process. A couple things to remember. They want you to get hired too. They really want you to get through this process, or they have to start all over again and find another person that they think might be a good. But so is your recruiter. They're really, really nice people, and they're going to help you get through it. Do leverage them. Ask them about what is expected. Ask them about who you're going to talk to. Ask them about basically anything. They can be super helpful. They can tell you kind of what to expect, what questions to expect, what people are interested in. Sometimes they're like, hey, this person really likes to hear about A through Z. Talk to them. Do not be afraid of them. They want you to get hired. Ask them a ton of questions. Susan, I definitely want to hear about how you made it through the pandemic with Zoom bummers. That was my first one. Another thing that you're going to deal with is, especially if you're just starting in your search, is 2 types of job roles. FTE stands for full-time employee, and TVC, which stands for temp, vendor, or contractor. An FTE is the person who works directly at the company. For example, I work at Google. My paychecks come from Google. This means I am paid in a couple different ways: salary and a couple of extras, which include equity, insurance, bonus, and other perks, like the ability to travel, way too many backpacks. Tech, by the way, I don't know if we're just all backpack collectors or what, but it's the thing for whatever reason. This has a much longer interview process. We'll talk about both. In contrast, a temp, vendor, or contractor still works 40 hours, but you work for a holding company for the company. So these often come to your inbox as things like work for the world's largest search engine. And you're like, that's Google, or the world's largest social media provider. And you're like, just say Google, just say Facebook. They can't, because you don't actually work at those companies. You're working at the holding company. They tend to be hourly pay, but the base is much higher than you would expect for the same level for a full-time employee. So if you are someone that just wants cash on hand, there's actually a good reason to be a TVC. You'll get paid with cash on hand. Not a bad thing in the current market. The interview process can be much faster, often is. There are definitely pros and cons to both. One of the main reasons that people don't love being a TVC is it's not necessarily stable. It tends to be limited to 2 years. So it can be a little bit harder in that regard. If you're the kind of person that keeps wanting to move around the world, can be great though. Some just call these temp or contractors, by the way. TVC is a term that Meta and Google tend to use, but contract, temp, vendor, all of these things are just keep an eye out for them if they're job roles that you're interested in. One of the main reasons that you might, the hiring process for FTEs is what we've talked about. It is long, it can be arduous. With the TVC process, I've heard it as being as short as a friend vouched for you. I know people that have done this. Hey, this director vouched for me and they made me the offer. It can be you talk to somebody for an hour or a 30-minute interview and you're good to go. Sometimes it's just a couple of quick interviews. The bar is not, I wouldn't say it's lower, but it's definitely not as obnoxiously rigorous in figuring out people's systems. There's one company that loves to say they don't hire anyone until they've interviewed 3 times. That's never going to be the case. There's no point of like interview process for the sake of process, which can be really nice, especially if you're just starting out on your career and you want to make that point to someone to help you prove that you can jump into that next thing. And almost always you get a really cool name on your resume, which makes the next job ridiculously easy to get if you do want to go into full-time work after that point. Okay, question break specific to anything that we've talked about so far. Let's give it like 30 seconds to jump in questions. I think this automatically refreshes. Cool. Okay, we'll start here. How do you stand out with the tech layoffs? First of all, this sucks. Like, let's all be really open and honest with that. It is okay to be angry. It is okay to mourn. It is okay to do whatever you're feeling. Whatever you're feeling is the right thing to feel. How you stand out now is actually almost no different than what you would stand out before. Storytelling and impact. And I know you're like, come on, Zoe, there's got to be more to it than that. There's really not. People get laid off for all sorts of reasons. In this last layoff, some of the absolute most talented people I have ever worked with got laid off, as did some people that I didn't like. So don't be too deterred by that, I would say. There's still a ton of opportunity. The jobs are still coming in. Now, if you did get laid off, also don't be afraid of saying, hey, I was caught in those layoffs. And that's why I'm looking right now. Empathy is not a bad thing to lean into. And there's a lot of great people out there that want to help. But if you have not been laid off and you're just trying to get that first job, I know you're like, okay, Zoe, you safely have a job and it's easy to say, don't worry, but try not to worry. You are still bringing so much value. I saw somebody's coming from education. I know somebody coming from PT. Like, these diverse skill sets can be really, really engaging and specific to companies. I will say, like, stand out by being specific, going towards ed tech. If you come from education, even if it's not what you want to do long term, can be a really great way to stand out right now as having something unique for folks. How do you follow up on the impact of your work? As a contractor, I don't always see how my research was implemented, if at all. Yes, it's really hard. One thing I will say, if you go back and watch the YouTube, have an impact tracker at all times. These are just great ways to always be kind of looking at the little things. You don't know what might eventually become a big deal. Contracts are often 6 months to 2 years. Something should launch in that time. It's not always the case. I was working on something 3 years ago that I think is launching next year. So sometimes it just takes a really, really long time. But picking up those little things. One thing to keep in mind, I am never going to be looking at 2 job candidates and go, okay, well, this person made $5,000 and this person made $50,000. I'm going with the $50,000. It is really easy to make $50,000 at YouTube, right? It is really hard to make $50,000 as a Series A startup. So there's so many factors in that I'm not looking at. What I'm looking at is there a clear connection between the work you did and the outcome that came of it? So even if it's really minor, even if it's something that you don't know like the numbers on, it is still totally great to share. Ask yourself those 4 whys and you will get to something that's really engaging. The other piece of advice that even as your contractor or internal, harass your product managers, for the love of God. Some of them don't want to get back to you. James, I trust that you are not that person. But hey, what happened with this? What experimentation went live? Give me those numbers. I need it for my performance review. I need it for applying for jobs. I need it for these reasons. Somebody has those numbers. If it has launched at all, there is some number that is out there that you can pull. So don't be afraid to harass people a little bit. in general, people are really kind. If they are a jerk, ask somebody else that's within that. If there's another researcher or a designer, they will almost always help you get that information. I did a ton of that, and people still don't dislike me too much, I think. So it works out. Okay, and I think we'll go, this one is the last one. Can you give us more examples of useful things to ask the recruiter that people usually don't think about? So early on, yes, ask them about the role. Don't be afraid to ask why it's open now, like who left before. They might know some of that. In terms of what's going on, some things in the hiring process, some things that I've asked about. Who am I interviewing with? How long have they been at the company? What kind of feedback do they tend to focus on? Is it more methodological? Is it more interpersonal? What are some things that they tend to lean into? Are there any red flags that they've been looking for? I have asked a ridiculous amount of detailed questions about all sorts of things. If you're choosing between teams, which of these teams is going to be able to pay better? Which of these teams has better retention? Oh, you told me that there's 2 people listening, and is that somebody that's getting trained, or is there another person interviewing for me? What are some specific skills? There's almost anything that you can ask. If they don't know, they will tell you they don't know. But I have had some recruiters literally tell me, like, these are the questions you're probably going to get asked. And they were right with like 6 out of 10. So don't be afraid. They will help you out. They really do want you to get that job. Awesome. Okay, a little bit more on these stages. And now we're going to focus for the rest of this presentation on the FTE interview. TBC is really going to depend on the job. You almost will never deal with a recruiter, by the way. It's just going to be straight to the hiring manager or somebody that you know. Great way. It's a really, really good thing to leverage people that you know. Reach out to people who used to be contractors. They can introduce you to the right hiring managers. Generally, the interview stages are broken up into 3 phases, which we talked about. The recruiter screen, some sort of skill screen that has to do with a portfolio review, a skill screen of some sort, and an on-site. These sizes are not relative to time, obviously. There is a ton of variation in that middle stage. And I don't want to say that this is always the case. I will say I interviewed with a company 2 years ago that, I swear to you, had 7 stages, and at 4 I dropped out. They kept inventing new ones to add in. Don't be afraid to drop out, by the way. If a company has a really bad interview process, chances are it is not the company for you. Use those as indicators. You are interviewing them just as much as they are interviewing you. Lots of variation there, though. Okay, recruiter screen. This is a checkbox screen. Do not stress out about this screen as much as you can. I have done this screen while walking my dogs. They're not experts. They almost always have a checkbox in front of them that says, does this person have this skill? Do they meet our criteria for the level of that job? From what I can tell so far, they are not making any super technical thing. Don't feel like you have to prep for this too much. But what you should do is know the information on your own resume. Be ready to talk about it. You'd be surprised, especially if you hired a resume writer, which I don't recommend you do. Make sure you know what's on there. Make sure you know what's in the job posting. This is a piece of advice that's been given for years. It's a great one. Download the job posting when you apply. Make sure you reviewed it. What are the skills that are on there? Especially for the women in the audience, we tend not to apply until we have 80% of the skills. Men apply at 40%. So apply even if you don't have all the skills, but know what they are and be able to do things like group them in your head and say, no, I might not have heuristic evaluation at scale, but I do know ABC, which is related to it. So know what they're looking for. Know it's the right company, by the way. This is my own embarrassing story. I was applying for the Colorado Division of Wildlife, which I had very much confused with another company with the same name, another government agency. And I was going on and on about this amazing work that they had been doing, and it was the wrong one. So don't be me. Make sure you know who you're talking to. And then they're also going to match your interest. Be interested in the job. It really doesn't matter why you're interested in the job. It could be an amazing manager. It could be an amazing role. It could be an amazing company. But make sure you have a why that is more than like, I'm really interested in working at Lyft because I use Lyft and rideshare. Hundreds of thousands of people do. Feel free to use it more, by the way. My stock is not doing well. But make sure that you're actually interested in it for some reason. Nobody's going to judge what that interest is, just that you have actual interest. The questions to expect. Skill, can you tell me about your experience with X? Have you done much of Y? Are you comfortable with Z? These are going to be straight from whatever that posting was, so none of these should feel like a surprise. We're looking for Q. Can you tell me about that? These are good ones to start to listen for red flags, though, by the way. So if you get a ton of questions about, like, how do you deal with toxic stakeholders? How do you deal with, you know, if you're the person that's totally cool with that, lean in. If you're not, maybe opt out at that point. Interest, why this company? What are you looking for in your next role? And why are you leaving your current role? You will get this one. I saw this as one that people didn't like getting. I actually love this question because it is such a great opportunity to highlight something cool about the next company, just to show that you've been listening. It doesn't actually matter, by the way. When I left Google and went to Lyft, I was looking for a smaller company with more impact. When I left Lyft and went back to Google, I was looking for a larger company with more impact. They just want to hear that you know what they're up to and what you're moving into. So don't stress about this too much, but have a good answer. Other jobs. What other interview processes are you in now, and at what stage? This is one that you're going to get. Please, if you are able, have multiple interviews going on at the same time. I know it's overwhelming. I know these processes are exhausting. There's no way around that. But if you can have multiple of these going at the same time, you are going to move faster. You are often going to be paired with people that are more compassionate to what the hiring manager wants. So if they're like, I really want this person and I think I'm going to lose out, they're probably going to get people that they've told, hey, I really want this person and don't want to lose out. Is that fair? Absolutely not. Is that the way it is? Yes. Have those multiple offers, and you can use it to get a much better offer at the end of the day. So it's really good all throughout the process. When they ask you this, be honest. Yes, I am in early stages with 3 other companies. I'm in late stages. I'm in final interviews with these other ones, which is also a great way, by the way, that hopefully all the offers will come in within a couple weeks of each other. In my last application, I had 4 that came in within 2 weeks of each other. And it gave me really great choices to really evaluate what I wanted. So be honest, but have a couple going. And how soon do you want to land somewhere new? Do you want to change jobs in the next month or in the next 6 months? This is going to do 2 things. One, it's just a match, right? If you are graduating in 6 months and you want to get a position going now, it is not a bad idea, by the way. But hey, it's going to start in 6 months. They might be matching you with positions that are available further out. Whereas if they really want someone in there in a month, it's going to be a good way for them to know, but also helps put time pressure. So if you're saying, I'm talking to somebody else and I want to start in 2 months, they're going to move you through that process faster. One thing to keep in mind, the average time to hire at most of the large tech companies is between 3 and 8 months. It takes a long time. So prep for that. If you want to be in sooner, make sure that you're telling them that. Couple tips for success. Read the job description. Yeah, Sonia, it's an ouch. They can go on forever. Sometimes it's to your advantage, though. Read the job description. This sounds silly, but please do it. You'd be surprised how often it comes that way. And if you don't know what something means, don't be afraid to ask, by the way. One that didn't bite me, but I guess it kind of did. When I applied at Lyft, it was for the Lyft rentals team. They had just launched rental cars. I didn't know that. I was very excited to be on the rental bikes team, which I didn't figure out until my on-site. It ended up being an amazing team. I'm very happy it went the way it did. But ask questions, read the description. If there's anything that's unclear, don't be afraid to ask. The recruiter will help you with that. Have some examples ready of each thing that's in the description, or at least a couple of them. Know what the role is company and the company is doing. This one does bite often. My favorite was when I interviewed somebody about a job at Lyft, and they told me all the things they loved about Uber. So make sure you're thinking about the right thing. Know your why. Again, that can be the company, the role, the manager, the product, anything, but have a good why. It can be short, it can be quippy. It does not need to be some brilliant life story. If it does, feel free to share that. But it can just be, I've heard amazing things about this manager, or I really like the mission of this company because it aligns with this thing with me. Make it specific, but just have a why. And stay calm. This one, I swear to you, is really fun. I love these interviews. It's a great way to start to get a sense of what that company is like, and they shouldn't be difficult. So do not stress for these. They tend to be really kind. They want you to get the job. I know I've said this a few times. lean into their kindness. That was one of my mistakes early on, is I was like, oh, they're too busy for me. They're not. They want to talk to you. They want to answer your questions. Use them as a resource. They're there for that. Okay. Skill screen. Skill screen is really different at different companies. This is specific to research, by the way. Here's some of the things that I've heard so far or been a part of. Amazon loves a written summary of a past project and then a verbal walkthrough. And if you're like, wait, what? Like a one-pager? Yes, like a one-pager. Amazon is actually still not indexed. Almost every other major tech company that I know of is indexed. Amazon is still predominantly, at least from my understanding, in writing. So they want to know that you can write, which, as we all know, is a skill that not a ton of people have. So be ready to like impress your high school English teacher again. It's a written project. Meta is the hypothetical research scenarios. Google used to do this, no longer does. It's a very recent change. These are the like, imagine ABC was happening. Somebody had written it as one of their least favorite. Google is now a portfolio review, which it means I have to stick my own foot in my mouth because I've been the person who's like, you don't need a portfolio. Apparently now you do. And you walk through a past project with some sort of visual going along with it. There are a number of companies that do this, though it's less common. And then probably the most common, especially with small and medium-sized companies, is a verbal project one run through where they will say, hey, tell me about a time when, and you will tell them about that project. Yeah, so the hypothetical is one of 4 that Meta likes to use. Diana put in the app. Meta makes you pick an app and they ask you a hypothetical. That's a really common one. Google has their own, they're used to anyway. I hate these, but they exist. Put a little devil side on that. I really hate these. You can workshop these as much as you want. You will get good at them. They are a skill like the SAT. If you are going into these though, please, please, please reach out to someone who works there, who has been through it, somebody on ADP list. These you just really kind of need to prep for. I don't know. I don't know what these teach you. I don't think these teach you anything about anyone as a researcher, but they exist. So here we are. So 1 minute, have you shared anything else? Have you seen anything else other than what I've shared before? This is a researcher's question. Feel free to drop it in the chat and we'll talk about all the craziness we experience. I also love it. Just shows me one person at a time. So I've just been staring into Antonio's eyes for like 30 minutes now. Okay, I'm not seeing anything else dropped in, but whatever it is, top line summary is a great one. No matter what, they are looking at one thing. They're looking at how you think, how you decide, and how you act. They are not looking for how you do. The example that Diana dropped into the chat, which is pick any app and tell me, and they're going to ask you a hypothetical, like a PM comes to you because you've had a lot of new users download and open the app, use it once and never come back. I am not actually looking for you to tell me exactly what method you would use and why that method is appropriate. For example, I would interview 6 people because Nielsen Norman told me to interview 6 people. Or I would, as a designer, I would look at how the app has changed over the years and see if it changed over time and then iterated on that. I'm looking for how you think about this. What is the origination of that problem? What resources do you need to start to pull apart that problem? How do you start to think about it? This is so weird. Again, I hate these, but this is also throughout the whole interview process. You're never going to be in this situation in a job where you literally have to sit there and be like, okay, PM, let me tell you all the ways I'm thinking this through. It's a conversation. In the interview process, it's a very one-sided conversation. You are showing me how you think, what factors you are thinking about, what else you are pulling into that equation. So really lean into that. Why? We'll talk about this a lot. Tell me why. Always tell me why. Some things to think about with the Amazon. It will literally be a case study write-up, problems, goals, who are your customers, what methods did you use, why. They are going to ask you a lot of why this, why that. If you ever get a question, by the way, well, why didn't you do this? That's a good thing. They're prompting on something. Don't feel like you have to get into defensiveness. Just give me a why. Oh, you know what? The budgets were limited. Had the budget been different, I could have explored that. I think the benefit of that would have been this. But honestly, I think the risk or the time or the budget probably wouldn't be worth the advantage I'd see. That's the kind of thing that I'm looking for. Meta loves an app critique, as we mentioned, or a teardown. For designers, it's almost always an app critique. Go in and tell me what sucks about this other thing, what could be better. Google is now a portfolio review. This is going to be a lot of like, what did you do? Why did you do it? How did you think about analysis? When did you think about analysis? We love this question, by the way. A lot of companies do. Did you think about analysis at the end or in your design? Pro tip, should be in the beginning. And a verbal project one through is almost always, tell me about a project that XYZ. Tell me about a time that a PM disagreed with you. Tell me about a time that your research recommendations were ignored. Tell me about a time. And always, though, it's a why. Tell me the story. Something really dramatic happened. You came out of it. Something cool came at the end. For you designers in the room, thank you for being here, for listening to a researcher for an hour. Really big common one is a portfolio review, much more common for designers than researchers. This will be a verbal walkthrough of your portfolio. Biggest mistake I see here, though, is still just showing me the pretty, beautiful what you did and not telling me how you got there. This especially happens with mock projects where you say, like, look, I made Airbnb's app so much prettier. It might be objectively true that you made it prettier. If you did not make it more useful, if you did not have that in mind, that people are going to buy more or save more or whatever else, you are not showing me that you did good design. You're showing me that you did good art. And I love art as much as the next person, but it's not going to get you a job as a designer. So tell me that why, walk me through that process. It might also be a walkthrough of the past process, or very commonly as well, a teardown of another app. It's never going to be the company you work at now or the company you're applying for. So have another one in your mind that you know you're not applying for. It should be moderately complicated. I made the mistake of using Strava once. Ridiculously simple app. It's only now becoming more complicated. There wasn't a lot to talk about. So pick one that you know well, that you can talk through. Like TikTok is a great example. General tips on this. Tell me why. You're like, Zoe, I know I've heard this. Swear for the love of God, lean into the why. People do not do this enough. Or they'll just give me the methodological background because Lean UX told me to. Why did Lean UX tell you to? Why did they make that decision? I want to know how you think things through. Always connected to the impact, not the method itself. This is, I did X because of ABC limitations, opportunities, and time limits. It's not, I used 6 people because Nielsen Norman told me to. Don't be afraid to take a moment to jot down your answers. I actually practice this with people when I do mock interviews. Bring a notebook, bring a pen. Hey, give me a second to think about that, and you're going to write down the key parts of what you want to talk about. This is going to serve a couple purposes. One, it's going to help you really relax and think about what you want to say. It's going to help you not lose your train of thought. And it's going to show that you're an intentional thinker. So don't be afraid. Take a minute, write things down. I've had people take 2 or 3 minutes. I do not mind. I am never judging you that way as an interviewer. Everyone knows that the scenario is highly fake. Take a second. Flag post was the last one. Somebody said bring a notebook. Yes, bring a notebook. Always bring a notebook. I love these little, the tiny field notes, especially when we were in person. They were the great way. Also, to the person that asked about NDAs, I will write the 10 projects that I know are public, right? I'm not at fear of NDA because it's out in the world. So notebooks are a great thing. And then flag post. So flag posting is the process of telling the interviewer what to expect. I'm going to tell you about A, B, and C. Now let me tell you more about A. This helps me understand where you're coming from. And you'll find interviewers have to take a ton of notes. We do this to try to be as objective as possible and have very clear rationale about why we should or should not hire this person. So flag post, it helps me out a ton. I'm going to tell you about these things. I have had in this deck so far 2 really clear examples of flag posting. What were they? Drop it in the chat. I'm going to wait for one of them. This is like my Susan, my teacher moment. 2 examples of flag posting. It's also a great one of like, can I actually be silent for 30 seconds? Answer is no. Impact's a good one. So good ones of flag posting. I'm just going to make everybody sick here for a second. I did forget how many animations were in this deck. Recruiter, skill screen, on-site. Now I'm going to tell you more about the recruiter. Now I'm going to tell you more about the skill screen, and now I'm going to tell you more about the on-site. You knew what was coming. These are great ones. At the very beginning, I'm going to tell you about impact. I'm going to tell you about jargon. I'm going to tell you about job roles, and I'm going to tell you about how to bring this all together. That is flag posting. We do this a ton. Think about it with your verbal answers. It's something that tends to drop off a lot when we think about verbal answers. It's super helpful. It's also a great way to use the notebook, because what you're going to do is say, here's the 3 themes I want to tell you about. Those are your flags. I'm going to tell you about ABC. I'm going to jump in. RMS is a great one. We'll talk about that one. It's a great flag posting as well, especially if you're using it consistently. Okay, skill screen. Thinking about the skill screen, thinking about the early interview. Let's hit me with those questions. Start to drop them in. I'll grab whichever one's at the top, but definitely start adding more. Okay, some interviewers ask questions like, tell me about a time when, what if you don't have something that's exactly that? Now, if it's a good interviewer, it should be broad enough. Tell me about a time when you disagreed with a stakeholder. Tell me about a time when you weren't listened to. Now, if you are a lucky enough person that you've never been listened to, feel free to make it about the rest of your life. I am not actually interested in the work that you did that you're telling me about. I'm interested in how you managed and moved through that conflict. Now, the bigger mistake or issue that people tend to have is that you don't remember. I have been in this situation where you're like, oh my God, I know that has happened. I don't remember. Have a notes document, especially right now where we are doing this remotely. I will have pages of notes that say things like conflict and 3 or 4 examples of conflict. That will help you get familiar with those, but so you're ready to share those stories in the time. If you really don't have an answer, you're like, gosh, that's just never happened. Own the narrative, own the storytelling. You know what? I'm lucky enough that hasn't actually happened to me, but I'd love to tell you about a time where I helped somebody else manage through conflict. Just switch it. This also happens, by the way, all the time when you're in maybe a method that you haven't heard of. Engineers do this really well. Hey, can you tell me about a time when you gathered this query or whatever? And you're like, no, I actually haven't done that. Let me tell you about something that's similar. Be a politician. Answer the question that you wish they had asked. As long as you have a why, you're going to work through it. What is a must-have when it comes to portfolios? This is a huge question that I'm not going to be able to address today. Designers are very different than researchers. Regardless, the answer is a why. This is the biggest mistake I see in portfolios. It's a collection of really pretty work where you say, I did this method and I made this persona and I made this design. And then you're kind of relying on me assuming that you did it correctly and that it had impact and that you made the right decisions. No matter how pretty it is, I do not know if it was the right decisions. Tell me a story. Walk me through how you moved between things. It does not need to have every step. You only have about a minute of people's times to get through it. So just high-level story of what you did, how you moved through it. Okay. Good storytelling workshop. We're going to talk a lot about it today, moving through, but also like take a fiction class. There's so many great ones of these. How to tell a story, especially how to tell a kid's book. They're like 1-hour things on YouTube. These are really great ones to lead into. Okay, and this will be our last one for right now. Staff UXR, senior UXR, UXR associate, what is the difference? These have to do with level. So this does vary between companies. Google tends to be everybody else -1. So if you are a 5 at Google, you are probably a 6 at whatever other company. You tend to be more or less equivalent at Meta. I don't know about Microsoft, but that just has to do with where you are in hierarchy and how much you get paid. A research associate is the bottom. That's like an L2. It's about equivalent with an intern. Sometimes it's actually a step below an intern because interns should have some training beforehand where associates might not. At that stage, you are not expected to own research all the way through. Somebody else is probably telling you what to study. You are picking up specific parts of it and going through with it. You are presenting data or early designs. You are not actually as responsible for the why. So at that point, it is more acceptable to just lean into the methods. From there, you get into UXR. The next one is senior. That's usually equivalent of about an L5. By the time you get to senior, you should be owning multiple projects, potentially across multiple teams or multiple orgs. You're really working towards strategy. Staff is equivalent to 6 in most cases. This is really driving strategy. Senior staff is 7. These then become parallel actually with L5 or 6, depending on the company, with management tracks, which usually have the same titles, just with manager added to the end. So it's just leveling pieces. And the exact same thing applies for design, it signs for product. They are just levels to help you understand where you are in that hierarchy. If you are brand new, you're just starting out, you're going to want to apply for those associate or US researcher positions. Once they add something as a thing to the front, staff, senior, etc., that's a more senior role in most cases, with the exception of associate. Cool. Okay, keep dropping those questions in as we go, please. Okay, so now we're going to take a quick second to practice some of these interview pieces. Again, please take notes. This is in your notebook, in your workbook. In this one, I'm going to reward you for sharing, because you are going to share out with the group, and the group is going to help critique. So don't drop it in the chat. We'll pick people. I think we can give people mic access. Yeah, because we had our Zoom bomber. And you are going to share. So some things to think about. Think about why. Think about flag posting. This is what I'm going to tell you about, and what is the impact. Now, if you are in this moment going, hey, Zoe, I do not have an example of this. I do not know what you're talking about. Great, make it up. Like, pretend that you are Elon Musk right now and the impact you are having on your company. Doesn't matter. We're going to spend about 15 minutes here. We're going to take about 8 minutes to start to write out your story, and then we'll have 2 minutes for each person to share it. 1 researcher, 1 designer. And here is your prompt. Designers, tell me about a time when your design recommendation was ignored or heavily modified without your support. If you are still in school, this is an edit that somebody gave you on a paper or project that you disagreed with. What did you do, and how did you still ensure the best outcome for your user? If you were in school, how did you ensure the best outcome for your project? Researchers, a product manager has come to you to figure out a problem. Last year, the team launched a feature that research supported. They had your buy-in. However, it hasn't done as well as you had hoped. And how do you figure out what you should change to make it do better? Now, if you're sitting here going, these are really, really broad, Zoe. Yes, they are broad by design. So pick what you want to focus on. Tell your little story. Limit it down, focusing on why, flag posting, and impact. So we'll take 8 minutes. We'll meet back up here at 7:22 Pacific with your examples. And I will be answering questions that we haven't gotten to into the Slido. If you have any questions about this, just drop it in the chat. Hona asked, for the researcher one, are we supposed to talk about a time that happened to us, or this is a hypothetical? This is a hypothetical. If it has happened, feel free to lean into that. If you get a hypothetical that you've already done it, it's never a bad idea to say, oh, actually, I've dealt with this, and this is how I dealt with it. It shows expertise. But in this case, I'm hitting you with a hypothetical because these are the ones I hate the most. So they're the best ones to practice. hold on to your notes for now, Laura, and then we're going to have 2 people share one at a time.
This is where some wait music would be very appropriate.
Feel free to sing for us if you'd like. Also, definitely cut this.
I'll save your ears.
No, fun fact, Antonio was the lead singer of a band in high school, Mexico City.
If you like classic rock, Led Zeppelin, I got you.
So in 1 minute, we're going to have 2 people verbally give their story as though they were answering the question in the interview. So you'll use your notes to help you figure out what you're going to talk about. And I'm going to pretend to be your interviewer for a second. If you are that person that wants to engage with this with me, again, whoever does, 1 designer, 1 researcher, I will review your resume. For anyone in here who's had one of my resume reviews, they're very detailed. They tend to be helpful, I think. Nobody's told me otherwise, though also I work with really nice people, so I think if it wasn't, they just wouldn't tell me. But feel free to tell me if it's not. But you're going to share it with the group in front of this 96-ish people. The 6-panel interview that you will deal with when applying will feel like nothing after this 96. Okay, can I get 1 designer? Whoever comes off mute first. We got our volunteer. Awesome. Laura, tell me about a time your design recommendation was ignored or heavily modified without support. What did you do and how did you ensure the best outcome for the user?
Okay, we were, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I was on a team that we were redesigning the job board for the company, and our research and our user interviews had indicated that we added certain things to the job board, and the next draft of the company's website did not include any of those. we had a lot of backup. So this was a capstone project. So it wasn't like, we could go out there and tell them, and be persistent about it. So we put it at the end of our final presentation. We said, we strongly recommend that you do these things. And that was our solution.
Awesome. Who's got some feedback for Laura? I will call on the SDXD people if no one else answers.
I can go.
Amazing.
Awesome. I think I would have loved to know more about the story, I guess. What were the recommendations your team made? Why did the team, reject them, it sounds like? Just a little bit more about, I guess, more context about the actual issue, and then maybe even the collaboration you had and the back and forth you had with the team would be good.
Yeah, I love that. Some of the things I really enjoyed, Laura, you did start to establish background, right? Like, this is what we were doing and why. And that is such a good thing and something we skip over sometimes. This is what was going on. Don't be afraid to throw some jazz hands in there. Like, this is why it was interesting. This is what the constraints were. You did some really cool thing about constraints, right? Like, I didn't actually get to follow up on this. I didn't get to see. You showed me what you did in the end, right? Like, we said we really strongly recommend this. Well, what did you do before? And how did you make that decision to move from what you did the first time to the second time? So the first time we did this, and those changes weren't made. What was the process then? So did you go back to your team and say, hey, we weren't listened to? What do we do about that? Did you go to leadership and say, hey, I was kind of surprised we didn't see those changes. Can you tell me more about that decision? What did you hear? Don't be afraid to really lean into all of the steps of that story to say, this is how I got here. So an example of what that might look like is, like, I had this capstone project. It was really time limited. I was really excited. It was a job board. We had gotten all this good feedback that this was an imperative part of people getting their first job out of university, especially people, I'm making this up, of course, who had never applied for a job before. We knew we had some unique constraints in that this was a broad university population, so it had to work for people with a diversity of language and interest and past experience. And what we found was a bunch of things needed to change to make it more equitable. One of those things was this. We provided that suggestion, and unfortunately, they ignored it. We really weren't sure why, and we couldn't get good feedback from them on why they chose not to do it. So I went back to the team and said, hey, we don't know why they're not adopting it. What are some things that we can think of to make them think about adopting it more? Maybe they didn't realize how strong that thing was. So we told them it was strong, but we also said, this is why we think it's important. You're like, God, that's long. It is, but it isn't. It becomes much more engaging, even though you're like, oh, it's so many little things that I didn't think much about. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, it totally makes sense. Let me tell you the fun part about this, even though, is that we're doing this for a meetup group in Japan for expatriates. So the designers, people from outside of Japan who come to Japan to work. And this was their job board. So I know it's very fun. It's
but
lovely.
even setting that, right? Like, it was this unique space of, like, different cultures together. Give me some drama, give me some spice. Somebody had asked about, like, well, what if I'm interviewing in a field that I don't know very well, like fintech? As long as you're telling a good story, I can apply that anywhere, right? Oh, she's got a unique something that has it's the same at Google. How do we still make it work for this person? How am I thinking through this problem and making it happen? Doesn't really matter the industry. It's showing me that you can think it through. Okay.
That's great.
Laura, thank you so much. Email me your resume or portfolio. We'll provide you a review. We saw a bunch of people volunteer for research, some of which I've already reviewed your resumes. So I'm going to grab somebody that I don't think I have, which is Charlene. I don't think I've reviewed your resume. go ahead and share. So a PM has come to you and figure out a problem. Last year, the team launched a feature that UXR supported, but it hasn't done as well as you had hoped. How do you figure out what to change?
Yeah, I don't know if this is the right way to answer it, but I'm going to try. So I would say that I would just start by saying that, getting to know that something is not working might have led to some wasted effort and cost, but on a more positive or optimistic side, now we can help like pivot and strategize better and avoid the sunk cost fallacy where we're continuing to invest additional time and effort just because we've already invested in it so much. And so there are three things that I would like to look into from the previous research that was done, which was I would want to know what the previous research question and plan was, the methods that were used, and whether some of the outcomes that did come from it, even though the feature itself was not doing as well, but whether some of the outcomes were still would help in like shaping the future direction of it. And so if when I do revisit the research question, I would want to know whether the research plan and the data that was collected aligned with the research question. So for example, I would also want to know how, like what kinds of methods were used and whether there was a methodological issue. So for example, if we had too few participants or a non-representative participant pool, and which is why the feature might have seemed to have worked on that a sample, but is not currently working on with our larger like user base. Maybe that was an issue. So I want to look into that. I would also want to see if there's any data that came from it that is still useful. So we would be able to like create iterations on the previous research by choosing some variables more carefully, just because knowing what doesn't work might help us shape the future research goals.
Awesome. Okay, who's got feedback on that one? Feel free to put it in the chat or jump in verbally.
I can take a stab at it. That's kind of violent phrasing. Think of something that isn't take a shot now as well. But awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective, Charlene. I think one of the things that you did really well was talking about referring to previous research, right? You want to go back and understand that plan. And then I also really liked how you were talking in, relationship to cost. It shows me that you're really intentional with, understanding the cost of your labor and the time and the efforts that put into, it just shows me that you're really thinking about, the business of your research. I think those are really, really strong. And then also that you're intentional about methodology. Some feedback that I have for opportunities is this is a collaboration question, right? Your PM has come to you. So you also want to highlight some of your relationship strategy, like your relationship strategies, how have you fostered maybe that relationship so that they've come to you? If this is research that you had done in the past, maybe there is, you want to work with your team on some of their gut instincts about what they think maybe has shifted. And then I would be careful not to critique the previous research because you don't know if you're the one who had done that or if it's a member of your team. So instead of potentially finding fault with it, just kind of thinking about how you can iterate on it, I think is the right direction, which you did end on. But yeah, thanks so much for sharing.
I love that feedback. I love the way you framed it as well. Anybody else?
I have a way to saying, but it was just on top of my mind. I don't know whether that will solve. It will be saying that I'll see how often my recommendations, suggestions, or ideas not getting supported or like not getting heard of, because always when designing conflicts or every design decision, sometimes like conflicts is inevitable. And then for a good designer, I feel like being a good communicator, but yeah, you have to be a good compromiser, because depends on how my designer has to evaluate how much the design decision weighting as a whole. So I'll just say depends on how often and then how the design decision, how big is the design decision as a whole. And then that's also based on review the previous research or done many rounds of different research, and then seeing the data, and then yeah.
I love that. So there's a bunch of things that I'm loving that I'm hearing. I also want to say I love the way you're like, I want to know what happened before. You said the UX research aligned with it. Did it? This is a question that we do have to ask ourselves sometimes. Especially we all have this like pleasing bias. Sometimes we're like, oh yeah, it's a great idea. And maybe that's not really what the research said, or it wasn't followed correctly. And it's a good thing to evaluate. I think Hoda made the points. I also think what hasn't done well, what does that mean? I love it when people start with this, by the way, with hypotheticals. A great way to start and a good challenge is ask 3 questions. In this case, what do you mean hasn't done well? Does that mean that people aren't using it? Does that mean that they started using it and stopped? Does that mean a lot of people are using it, but we thought a ton of people were using it? And then it might just be like, was that expectation even reasonable, right? How do we break apart to understand what are they actually asking? A great example, I was talking with somebody earlier today, is PMs are going to come to us all the time and say, tell me what people liked. We cannot do that effectively in qualitative work. It's actually really hard and quite pointless to do in quantitative work. We want to know what motivates behavior. So what is the question they are actually asking? What is the data they actually have? I think you did a great job of that with saying, well, what was that past research? Somebody else said, I would also talk to other teams like marketing and sales to understand what they are thinking about with that product. These are great ways to say, what do we already know? What are the opportunities? What is already missing? And then moving into the research plan. Focus on the past, that's a great thing, but don't also worry about focusing on the future, right? Like once I know that truly this is what's going on, use rate was not adopted as much. Usually they won't tell you, by the way, exactly what you're looking at. State the assumption. My assumption is people didn't use it and it isn't about marketing, whatever that is, and then start to formulate your plan. Always leaning into the why. I think you did a really good job of that. This is what I'm thinking about. There was one that dropped into the chat that said, where did this go? Which is kind of just a list of what they actually would do. Start with a hypothesis that the project wasn't successful. These are great methods, but I want to see why. What does it mean to be successful? Why that piece? And you're like, God, it's so weird. That's not how we talk in the world. It gets easier with time. Really think about why. When I first started doing this, honestly, one of the best things that I would do is harass my housemates. So, hey, can I have dinner? Great. Why do you want dinner? Well, I'm thinking about the fact that you said yesterday that you're concerned about your health, and therefore I'm going to really be thinking about a salad, but also I worked out today, so I really want some sort of protein in that. We had explored that new way of cooking tofu. Why don't we think about that? Be annoying, lean into that why, and it will start to come naturally. And this works for the hypotheticals, it works for the tell me about a time, but really lean into that why. But great work, everyone. The next best thing, by the way, practice these with friends. So you've got 100 of them in this room-ish. Just ask a bunch of people to work through them with you. There's so many of these on Glassdoor, and I've included some in the desk that we skipped through on this slide, but they are there. So the on-site interview, it's really long. I'm so sorry. Train for it kind of like a marathon. It's a long day. Have your favorite energy drink or coffee or whatever ready to go. If you're doing it from home and you live with other people, ask them to bring you a coffee halfway through. There will be some breaks, but set yourself up for success. Now, quick step back. These interviews are really long. It is probably too long. Ensure that you know why each stage exists. This is a great use of your recruiter. Hey, you told me I have 4 interviews. What's the point of each? They will give you a name. Google has one called Googliness, which is like culture fit and like how you think about your users. But they will say that one is for methodological analysis. Sometimes the questions are really similar, but they're looking for different things. Ask them to tell you what that is. What are they evaluating me for? What are they trying to do? And they will almost always give you an answer. It'll be something like collaboration or teamwork. We'll talk about these more. but lean into whatever they're looking for. Don't feel like you have to answer every question with everything. You won't be able to. So target in on what you need to focus on. This is what this looks like. It's almost always a presentation of your work to a panel. This will be between 1 and 3 projects, depending on the company. Some will give you some flexibility and say 1 to 2 or 2 to 3. 2, I think, is the sweet spot. 3, they tend to be really short and really hard to get that story in, but it'll just vary between companies. You can usually edit them up or down depending on the company. You will then have a series of one-on-one interviews. There's the fewest I've heard of is 3. The most I've heard of is 6. These are 30 minutes to an hour each. You're like, that sounds exhausting. It is. But you will get through it. And then if you didn't have a skill exercise earlier that walks through your research or design process, you will probably have some sort of whiteboarding exercise. These second ones, the one-on-ones and the whiteboarding, these are very similar to the skill screen, which is the methods we just talked about. The presentation of work is totally different. We're going to talk about this a little bit more. This is that it's kind of like a portfolio presentation, but way less text, way more walkthrough. For your one-on-one interviews, these are the most common things that you are going to be interviewed about. Core role knowledge. Do you know how to do the job that you are applying for? Collaboration. Do you like to work with others? Leadership. How do you lead? What do you think about leadership? Creativity. How do you think about solving difficult problems? Culture fit. How do you fit in with the company's ethos or core values? Really easy to prep for these. Just look at the company's core values online. And problem solving. You will not necessarily get all of these. There might also be different ones, but these are the most common ones that we see pop up. Some things to think about with these. Core role is just knowledge, experience. Have you done this before? Do you have a chance of doing it here? Collaboration is just how do you work with teams? How do you communicate? How do you recognize and receive feedback? Almost everybody's going to ask about this now. If you are new to getting feedback or struggle with it, I strongly recommend the book Thanks for the Feedback. It's a really great one to dive into that. Leadership is past experience. It might be in work. It might be outside work. If you ran your college's UX org or rowing team, not a bad thing to talk about. Also talks about self-development. How do you think about growing yourself and how you get things done? Creativity is more around problem solving and creative thinking. This is also around working around barriers. Someone did a really great job of saying, like, it was a spec project. I didn't have the ability to follow up. That's a barrier. How do you work around that? Culture fit, work in ambiguity. We love this. Here's the fun thing. Nobody's good at working in ambiguity, but we love to ask about it anyway. So be prepared for those questions. Your ability to challenge the status quo and do the right thing, even when it's hard. Different companies have different ones. Again, go to the core values. It's the easiest way to prep for these. And problem solving, thinking strategically, being curious, and analyzing and addressing complexity. Again, you won't necessarily hit all of these, but these are the kind of themes that you'll want to think about. And each interview will be different. So if it's the collaboration interview, don't feel like you have to really justify your methods. Focus on collaboration and those parts of the project. The recruiter, again, will tell you which one is which and what they're looking for if you ask. Regardless, however, tell me a story. It should be interesting. It should be clear, relevant, simple, and specific to you. What did you do? How are you a part of this? I don't want to hear about what other people did. I want to hear about what you did and how you thought about it. And for the love of all Broadway, add some drama. Don't feel like you can't be silly. Don't feel like you can't really tell the story and the risk and zhuzh it up a little bit. It's a good story. You should be able to tell it that way. And your storytelling pro tip for the night is, I absolutely swear to you, go to the library, go to your next door neighbor, go to your kids' room, and pick up a couple of kids' books. Read them through. You're going to find some really clear things. One, they're very engaging. They don't have many characters, at least characters that have names or the focus of the story. They do not talk or change clothes or eat if it is not relevant to the story. You know that Winnie the Pooh regularly ate deer, right? He's a bear living in the forest. That's what they do. They eat carrion. Winnie the Pooh largely eats toast and honey because it's relevant to the story that he eats toast and honey. It's not relevant to the story that he's not a vegetarian, right? What is your story? What are you leaning into? Make it simple, make it engaging, get all the way through, add a little bit of drama, right? So 2 examples here. The first is, I was asked to figure out if the new product worked well before launch. Okay, cool, we've set the stage. I found 6 people to talk with, and I conducted remote moderated interviews with usability. I found 6 problems with the project and conducted follow-up interviews to confirm. The feedback was consistent, so we launched successfully, making the company $2.2 million. You're like, cool, that's a lot of money. It's actually not a very engaging story though, right? In contrast, we had a history of launching things too soon, and while our early adopters were okay with rough edges, our new market wasn't. We're setting the stage for that story. Okay, there's something unique here. There was a lot of pressure internally to land this. You're showing me how you work with pressure. You're showing me how you work with pushback from other people. While I was confident in the direction, I knew we needed to really polish this. Okay, we're not doing foundational work. We're doing something that's more iterative on little bits, right? I didn't conduct any additional concept testing, but rather highly detailed usability, accounting for our 3 key user groups. I intended to test with 18 people. Okay, that's 6 each. I can work that on my own head. I hit saturation at 12. You're telling me that you know how to pick a sample size, right? You knew where to start, but you're also like, I don't need to waste resources I don't have. Really engaging story. The first does tell me what you did and has some justification and an outcome, but it's not that interesting to listen to. And it leaves a lot up to me as the reviewer to say, okay, well, was 6 appropriate? Was this method interesting? Was this outcome big? Maybe you could have made 10 million and you only made 2. Maybe you could have made 10,000 and you made 2 million. I want to know which one was part of it. Whereas B says it really sets the stage. I know what's going on with the team and what your challenges were and what you were up against. I understand why you picked those methods relative to the team's needs and time constraints. And I was able to see you connect to specific users, right? Like, this is why you made those choices. It's very clear. It's not what Nielsen Norman said. It's what was going on around you that really made that happen. So lean into storytelling. The biggest mistakes that are really common across design and research is telling me what you did in an effort to prove you did it correctly. There is no way for me to know that you made the right research or design decisions, right? I do not know the product enough. I do not know your limitations, your teammates, all of those other things. Maybe you did a survey with 6 people. Generally, that's a really bad idea. If you only had 6 users, maybe it's not a bad idea. Set the stage for me. Only storytelling can do that. And methods, both in design and research, there's lots of debate in how you use those. So don't give me the opportunity to just disagree with you. Listing impact as the number of things you did and not the outcome. If you did 10 studies poorly, I don't care. I want to know that you did 1 study really well. Focus on the impact. Focus what came outside of your discipline as well. So research affecting design, design affecting product, and so forth is really engaging and powerful. And then sharing too much or too little. We talked about this earlier with NDAs. I was in an interview once where people started sharing photos of their participants who were minors, and I immediately wrote, absolutely do not hire. They don't know how to respect an NDA. They also don't know how to respect the law. Don't do that. Share the appropriate amount. Inversely, if you can't tell me anything about what happened, it's not going to be an engaging story, right? We got to know that Winnie the Pooh is at least in the book. A couple of quotes to help drive that home. Great stories happen to those who can tell them. Ira Glass of This American Life, our favorite NPR Ira Glass, or Glass with 2 S's anyway. It's not about what you did. You can tell me an amazing story about the most boring project you did or the most minute, weird little thing you studied. Just tell me the story. And writing is a horrible, exhausting struggle, like a bout of some painful illness. This is hard. I don't want to underestimate that. It's going to take time, but I swear to you, it's worth it. And the way that you get to do this is actually a lot more fun. If you are someone that thinks clearest while riding a bike, as I do, take a notebook on a bike ride. Flag post beforehand, here are the 5 things I want to make sure I talk about, and then start to go on a ride and think about what that story is. Maybe that's a hike for you. Maybe that's cooking a meal or talking to a partner. Maybe it's sitting down and writing. Maybe you are that person, but really think about the story and work hard at it. It's worth it. You have a couple of storytelling methods. One somebody mentioned is the STAR methods, which is situation, task, action, result. This is amazing for one-on-ones. Amazon actually insists on it. There's also the CAR method or context, action, result, very, very similar. but you're telling me the situation, what was going on, task, what was I trying to do, what did I do, and what came of it, what was the impact. It's a really great way to answer questions and helps you make sure that you're getting through everything that you want to. But again, add some drama, add some flair. There's also the PAR method, problem, action, result. I really like this one where you get, this is everything that was going wrong and this is why it was going to be hard. Usually a very engaging story. And there are a bunch of different methods like this and so many great resources out there for them. So I've linked them here if you want to learn more, but Googling STAR method and you will get a million great resources. Cool. Okay, but my favorite for the presentation is actually called the hero's journey. So welcome back to high school. The hero's journey is the movement through a story. If you ever wondered why the early Star Wars were so much better than the later ones, it's because they followed the hero's journey. This is a call to adventure, movement through a supernatural aid. It is a storytelling format that really helps amp the drama and helps us understand how the character made decisions, moved through things, and came out the other side much better. So a couple of common things here. There's the call to adventure. This is what you were asked to fix. This is why you set out to do the thing. The supernatural aid is a guide or helper. These might be people, they might be tools. The threshold is a challenge or commitment that you overcame to start getting going. Challenges, what you did and why. This is along our side here. And then our abyss is our big drama, right? This is the slaying of the dragon, the figuring out that the dragon wasn't so bad after all. How did your work come of it? The transformation of what changed afterwards. Making atonement, which is just getting it to be back in service of the product and how you're coming out of it. And then coming back, that's your impact. How did you start again? Now, for an example, the hero's journey of YouTube downloads, I'll give you a quick overview. This was a project that was, or a product that was not very well used. Downloads for YouTube Premium. It was an automatic downloading playlist, or once a week, you would automatically download 10 new videos and delete the last 10. It wasn't being used. There was a lot of research supporting that it was beneficial, but nobody was using it. Constraints, the designer was leaving the team. They wanted to deal with it before they launched. And they said, just figure out usability. What's broken, we'll fix it, we'll relaunch it. It's got to be usability. Hero's journey to that, though, is, okay, what's the call to action? Figure out why it's not being used as well as it needs to be. Clear call to action there. Great story. Supernatural aid. You are the fast research program at YouTube, and you've got a lot of support from your PM. 2 pieces of aid there. Crossing the threshold. You set out to do that usability task that you were asked to do. Challenges. Product actually was useful. Nobody had any issues understanding how it was being used. They still didn't like it. So this is your big set of like, well, how do I convince them they need to spend more time on this, that it's not a simple usability fix? The abyss is maybe a debate with a stakeholder, the risk of launching too soon, really convincing them that something needs to change, going through that and committing to taking on this bigger challenge of actually figuring it out. The transformation might be that large scale changes that you made, increasing user control and awareness. How do I make the app what I want it to be? And atonement, actually launching it in a way that did support that designer, making sure they still got credit for the work that they did, and then figuring out how to start that cycle again. How do I make this thing even better? It becomes a very engaging story if you can tell me how people moved through it. So this is going to be our last practice of the night. I want you to do your hero's journey of a recent project. Focus on your why, how you enabled outcomes, and storytelling. Think about what these were. Your story does not need to be perfect right now by any means. All I want you to do is start to frame out what you think the pieces of that story were. So you will find something that looks a little bit like this in your notebook. And hopefully you can zoom in and see. The ordinary world is just how things were today and how you got back. So drop those in. I'm going to put this up while you go. And again, I'll be answering questions in the chat that I see in the Slido in the meantime. So open up that handbook and just drop in a line or two. Keeping an eye on time, we're going to make this about 6 minutes. So if you only get through a couple of your boxes, that's okay. But this is a great way to start thinking about what the story is you want to tell. Fun shout out to Miss Baker, who did teach me this method my freshman year of high school, and she didn't like me and I didn't like her. And the fact that I still use this actually makes me sad because I like to hold a grudge. be back here at 56 after. Awesome. Okay. It looks like we have a story, and we'll just do one looking at time. Sarah, could you share yours?
Hi, so this is a story for UX research. I was called in to support an indoor wayfinding team. They had developed new technology that was basically first of its kind for indoor wayfinding. But the hurdles were that the technology had to be like rebuilt a couple of times. Like it just trying to stand it up was technically challenging. The other challenge was that there were multiple teams. So the entry point to the experience was owned by one team, whereas the experience itself, what it ran on, was owned by another team. And then because it was a map-based experience, Maps was owned by a third team. So I had search, indoor wayfinding, and maps all bundled in one experience that I was going to conduct its first usability test on. A couple of times that I piloted the research study on it, I found critical bugs and just had to like totally bail on the research because I was like, guys, you know, these are critical bugs. There's like, it's going to totally impact the results of your testing. You need to fix these issues. And it was primarily due to the fact that these engineering teams, although not intentionally, were working in silos. In addition to that, I had to deal with numerous designer changes. Like several designers in this process had, you know, participated in this at different phases, but there was no one consistent designer throughout the entire time frame. And I was, as the UX research lead, consistently onboarding and carrying along what was the history and giving, you know, background and documentation and everything from that. So eventually, when we did get to the point where ready to, after a successful pilot, to run the study, prior to that, we knew that one of the issues was going to be the entry point was not acceptable at all. So worked with the final designer to come up with some proactively with the designer and the engineering team to come up with alternative entryways and entry concepts that could be concept tested in addition to the usability testing. Then from there, I ran a usability study with Go Camera, documenting, you know, from the user's perspective or the person's perspective, as that was with the Go Camera attached to them, as well as a screen recording of the application, and triangulated that with one-on-one interviews afterwards to determine, you know, what were the challenges and pain points along those journeys. They had conducted numerous tasks, and then finally did, you know, executed on some concept testing for the major pain point, which was the entry. The results were insights that impacted 3 teams: insights for map, insight for search, insights for the indoor wayfinding experience itself. And it just, those insights were phenomenal in terms of transforming that experience to just become like 100% better.
Awesome. There's some things I really liked about this, especially at the beginning. We see this drama, like there's too many people in the room and they don't want to listen to each other. So I'm trying to figure out, how do I do research and get these people to not hate each other, or at least work together? And by the way, there were pieces of this that were so broken that I couldn't even get good results. And I really had to figure out a way to address that first. I really like that. I think where we could have seen a little bit more is in the methods. You use some really creative methods. Don't be afraid of being like, this is why I triangulated. This is why I used a couple. This was the limitation of one, which I addressed here. Really leaning in so I can understand, like, oh, cool, that's why she did it. And then in the impact, the return bit of it, I started to see like, oh, cool, we've got this atonement, we've got this thing, these changes. You told me such a good story about the silo and the breakdown. I was looking for the wrap up of that story and we got them to talk to each other more. And we got to be proactive in thinking about this because we knew the silos were now a problem. So bringing it back to the start of that really becomes very engaging. And then I see, not only did she have these great research bits, she's got a lot of strategy. She's got a lot of ways she's bringing things together. That was awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing. So for anyone who volunteered to go live, you're brave, you're amazing. Thank you so much. Email me your resumes. If you don't have my email, SDXD will give it to you for those 3 folks. If you prefer a portfolio, that's fine as well. Just send whatever you've got. And with that, I think we'll wrap up with a couple of questions. I know people are starting to drop off. So we'll just answer a couple of these until people are done with me, which, you know, some of you already are. Any tips for what to do if you draw a blank on a hypothetical? Tips to get started? Yes. I go into a hypothetical always with 4 things in front of me. How do we know? So these are just like, what are the questions that I'm going to start with? What's already been established? So foundational, what's going on? How do we know this is the right question? What do we already know about that question? And from there, you're almost always going to start to be able to say, okay, this is how I'm going to say what the limitations are. Like, I don't actually think this is the right thing to do, or here's the other things I would think about. And now here's the actual thing I would do. Example of this is an interview question that Google doesn't use anymore, so I'll share it with you. Is a YMCA director comes to you and says, our budget's being cut. We need to figure out which programs are most popular to determine which should be saved next year. Start with questions like, well, what does it mean that the budget's getting cut? Why popularity? Why is that the metric that we're going for? What things other than popularity should we be taking into account? Like the diversity of our population and the diversity of the people we're serving, and programs that might not be super popular, but are really important. And then you can start to move into that and say, okay, well, you know, I don't think popularity is the best metric, but if that's what we're doing, here's how I'd think about popularity. I could consider a couple of different things, like looking at the logs of what's already been done, like doing surveys on satisfaction. Here's why I would do each of those, or here's how I would do them in combination with each other. The answer doesn't matter. It's just why and how you got there. Cool. This person said, how do you talk about mistakes or things you do differently in research study? I've been dinged before when I shared mistakes and framed them as positive learnings. Lean into the why, right? Often when we're saying, what would you do differently or what mistakes were made, we're just like, well, how do you deal with things going wrong and still make something happen? Or what awareness do you have of your growth areas? Be careful that you're never sharing anything that like you really shouldn't have done. I see this all the time with surveys where people be like, I surveyed 50 people. You didn't. You submitted a questionnaire of 50 people. It's not enough to call it a survey. It is not stat sig. Anytime you are sharing percentages with a sample size that small, I am going to assume you're not a very good researcher. So don't do that. I'm sure there are design equivalents of these things, but otherwise we're really not pushing on those things. We're just saying like, well, what if you had more time? What if you had less time? How does your thought process change with these additional constraints? Doesn't matter your answer as long as there is a very clear why. Cool. Let's do just a couple more until James waves at me to stop. Okay. How would you communicate your past career skills from another industry into UX? Course, portfolio, project piece if you haven't worked in UX before. I'm still just really looking for how you think about these things, right? Now, if you have not done any work in UX, I would totally recommend you do one of two things. One, do a mock project where you take a real app and really tear it down. Follow best practices, reach out to folks on ADP list or UX coffee hours and like really get feedback on what you're doing. Make sure you're doing the right thing. Should always have a why. The biggest mistake I see with this is they're like, clearly I changed this thing and clearly I have no idea if you changed it for the good. I just know that you changed it. So lean into that why. Or my favorite is reach out to nonprofits, especially ones that have things that you're interested in. I do this all the time with a company, with a nonprofit called Running Start, which is a nonprofit that trains young women to run for office. They often have research needs or design needs and would be very, very happy for your support. So reach out to them and say, hey, I'm hoping to do a project. What are some things that you're thinking about that could be improved, and work with them together on that. Develop that project based on that. But school projects are totally fine, again, as long as there's an actual why versus like, I just did it and here was the outcome. Cool. The ideal partnership between UX and product. Whoever messaged this, it depends. It's just a why question. I know this comes up in interviews. I'm happy to talk about this one offline, but there is no ideal partnership. It's just how you enable your best work by your relationship with that person. And that is just a question about how you like to work with other people, especially product, which has different goals than you do. What's the difference between an interview response for a midweight designer versus a senior? I heard somebody pop in. Does somebody want to add something?
Oh, no, that was me. I was just gonna say, I know we're a bit over time, so if we want to do like one or two more questions.
Let's just do this last one. Midweight and senior is just about strategic impact. Where are you taking things? The more junior it is, the more it can focus on methods. The more senior you are, the more I want to see about how you're thinking about driving things beyond the project itself into bigger changes overall or influencing leadership. And with that, we'll call it good. Again, I will be back on ADP list in January if you want to meet with me then. Ben dropped in for some nonprofits. Check out Taproot. There are so many great opportunities here. Lean in, lean in. I promise people want your help, especially if you're like, I want to figure this out. I want to talk to you guys and make things better. Thanks, Sonia. Very
Awesome.
kind. Always a pleasure, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Zoe. That was awesome. And thank you, the audience. Seeing the interaction and all the stories everybody posted was awesome to see. So great engagement. Yeah, there's so much to learn from this. And yeah, we'll be posting this to YouTube. So keep posted for that. But yeah, thanks again for attending. Thanks to ServiceNow. Exactly, yeah. On the topic of ServiceNow, I would like to give Ben the floor. If Ben, you want to say something about, well, actually not ServiceNow. It's been sorry, it's a bit late for me.
Well, ServiceNow is a good jumping off point because ServiceNow is our primary sponsor right now, but we're always looking for more sponsors. So we are looking in 2023 at going back into the office and doing some in-person events, and we'd love to have something hosted at your company. So if you are interested in learning more, please check out our website, sdxd.org/sponsor. I'll drop that in the chat as well. And I'd love to chat with you more. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well as the ADP list. And thank you, Zoe, and thank you everyone for attending. We really appreciate you all being here. And with that, I think we'll move into networking. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, we can give everybody 5 minutes. And then whoever wants to stay, feel free to stay. Yeah, we'll just let everyone unmute themselves, or maybe put people into chat rooms. If we're running out 50 people, is maybe too many at once.